And now for something completely different.
If you didn't recognize the opening, or more likely are too young to remember, that's from Monty Python's Flying Circus. They sometimes use that as a transition. And today, I'm going to do something completely different. Something I haven't done before. I'm going to debunk an Atheist video. Specifically, the September 14th edition of the Daily Atheist Morning Show entitled, Trump Knowingly Murders Americans. Normally, I support the Daily Atheist show, as you can see from this. I'm actually pictured in the opening of the show, but, like Matt Dillahunty, I want to believe as many true things and as few false things as possible. So when I hear falsehood spread, I would prefer it to be corrected, whether it's from a source I agree with, a source I disagree with, or even myself. In fact, I'm more concerned about falsehoods spread by the atheist community than I am by the religious community, because I want to be part of a group that believes in and stands up for truth. So Chris, Andy, and Naka, I love you guys, but on this one, you missed the mark, and I'll show you why. First, I'll let Chris introduce those on the show that day and the topic.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Atheist Morning Show. It is Monday, the 14th of September, 2020. It is, isn't it? Yep. 14th of, yes. So good morning. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. I'm the amazing Super Chris, your host. My co-host, Andy Hall, and my other co-host, The Rage, will be joining me in just a minute. Okay, yeah. So I read an article. Let me be honest with you. I observed the title of an article and skimmed through an article briefly, and then I sent it to Andy. Did you get to read the article, Andy? Done.
I did read the article. The name of the article is Former Federal Prosecutor Trump Admitted to, quote, second-degree murder, unquote, in Woodward interview.
Chris didn't read the article, but Andy did. Here it is. It's only 3 paragraphs long. This picture is the entire article, minus 2 lines that I couldn't get into the picture.
I'm just going to read a bit from this.
Okay, please.
In a Thursday appearance on Sirius XM's The Dean Obadiah show, the MSNBC legal analyst gave an incredibly harsh assessment of Trump's interviews with veteran reporter Bob Woodward. Trump's insistence in March that he wanted to, quote, play down the coronavirus threat, despite knowing its deadliness, quote, upped his own criminal ante to second-degree murder.
And here we run into a myriad of problems. The first is the credibility of the article. On the surface, it appears to be from a credible source, Glenn Kirshner. He does have valid credentials for the claims he is making. He was a prosecutor with the Army Judge Advocate General and in Washington, D.C. for 24 years and has prosecuted at least 50 murder trials, according to Wikipedia. Yes, Wikipedia isn't the most reliable source, and one of the links in the article I went to did not confirm what it claimed, but I did confirm this by putting together a few other sources. So his credentials do check out. You would expect this to be reliable information, so guys, I don't blame you for being fooled by it. Red flag number 1 is the fact that Kirshner is listed as the legal analyst for MSNBC, but in a list of media that ran this story, MSNBC is conspicuously missing. Not only was this story not run by MSNBC, it wasn't run by any of the major media sources. The biggest news agency to run this story was Fox News. Others that ran it were Yahoo, the source that you're using, Mediaite, BizPac Review, one that I can't even pronounce, and How Africa. All cite the same source, Kirshner, but it's actually the next one on the list that really sheds light on what's going on here. It's from Breitbart. Normally, I would never use Breitbart as a source. I don't consider them credible enough to even get right which way is up, but I make an exception here because it's not the substance of the Breitbart article that's important, but just the fact that the report was made. Here's what I mean, and red flag number 2. In the Breitbart story, it says Kirshner, who argued in April that Trump was guilty of second-degree murder for floating hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for the coronavirus, expressed the same sentiment for Trump for lying to the American people about the danger this virus posed. And here is the story they are referring to, which was published in April. Kirshner made the exact same allegation with regards to hydroxychloroquine in April that he's making about the Woodward interviews today. If there was substantial legal backing for this claim, the Democrats and the major news media would be all over it. The fact that they aren't should be a huge red flag. Then is the fact that Kirshner has made these allegations twice over 2 completely separate issues. Kirshner is more likely fishing for headlines than he is making a credible legal argument. Because MSNBC has no comment on this, and Kirshner is supposed to be their legal analyst, I wondered if he even still held that position. I'm not certain, but I don't believe that he does. When I did a search on MSNBC for Kirshner, there were numerous stories in 2015 through 2019, but only one in 2020 on insider trading. I also found this announcement in a Fox News article saying that MSNBC had hired Lisa Page as a new legal analyst. And as you see, there is a confirming tweet from MSNBC. So has she replaced Kirshner? I don't know, but it's likely. From MSNBC failing to run Kirshner's claim, MSNBC recently hiring a new legal analyst, and no one else making the same claims about Trump as Kirshner despite his credentials, he does not appear to be a credible source in this matter. Let's look at the legal claims that Kirshner makes to see why no one seems to be in agreement with him.
And this is what the legal expert says. There are only 2 elements for second-degree murder. The first is that you cause the death of another. No brainer on that one.
Right.
Andy, you completely missed the boat here. Causation is exactly the problem here and exactly why this isn't second-degree murder and why the legal community isn't agreeing with Kirshner. When you charge someone with murder, you must charge them with the death of a specific individual or group of individuals. There is no one person or even group of people that you can say that Trump was the direct cause of their death. Trump has contributed to the death rate from COVID in this country, but contributing alone isn't enough if there is no direct causation. The most commonly used test for causation is the but-for test. But for the actions of the defendant, the victim would not have died. You might be thinking, well, this fits exactly, because if Trump hadn't ignored the virus, more people would have lived. And you would be right, except which ones? Even if Trump had done everything in his power to stop the virus, some people would still have died from the virus. Which ones would have died had he done everything possible, and which ones would not? No one can possibly tell. This is the question that cannot be answered, and this is why Trump's actions fail the but-for test. You cannot collectively charge Trump with the murder of everyone who died from the virus. Well, you could, but not successfully. We know from looking at the rest of the world that even where more was done to stop the spread, it helped. It helped a lot, but it didn't save everyone. So whose death do you charge Trump with? That is where causation becomes impossible to prove. There is no one person that you can be certain of that would not have gotten the virus but for the actions of Trump. You can't charge him with the murder of everyone who died from the virus, as some of them would have died even if Trump had done all that he could. Whose death do you charge him with? You can't arbitrarily pick a dozen people who died from the virus and say Trump made their deaths more likely and therefore he's guilty of murder of these specific people. It would be impossible to show beyond a reasonable doubt that his actions killed these specific people. So no, Andy, not only is causation not a no-brainer, It's not even possible to prove. It's why Kirshner's whole argument fails, and why no one in the legal community is agreeing with him.
And let's see, the second element is the intent element. And when you think about first degree, second degree, and manslaughter, which could be, it's also third degree murder, the same thing. It's all about.
This is also incorrect. Manslaughter is homicide, but it is not murder. They are not the same thing, as Andy claims. Murder requires malice aforethought. Manslaughter does not. It's a huge distinction, because in murder, the perpetrator intends to cause the death of his victim, and in manslaughter, he does not. In manslaughter, death is the natural consequence of the perpetrator's actions, but not the intent. Third-degree murder exists only in a few states as a separate category of murder, but even where it does, it's not the same as manslaughter. Third-degree murder can be felony murder, where you are guilty of murder if someone dies while you are committing a felony, whether you directly caused that death or it was the actions of a partner in crime, or it can be reckless endangerment. Both of those require some kind of intent. Felony murder requires the intent to commit a felony. Reckless endangerment requires the intent to commit an act that shows depraved indifference to life. The classic example of depraved indifference is firing a gun into a crowd. You don't intend the death of any particular individual. You might not even cause the death of anyone, but because you intend the act of firing the gun, the act is likely to cause the death of someone. You have acted with depraved indifference to the lives of everyone in the crowd. However, you cannot be charged with a crime against everyone in the crowd. You can only be charged with depraved indifference or third-degree murder with regards to the person who is actually shot. This is the only person for whom you can show direct causation between the depraved act of firing the gun and the result, the death of the person shot. If everyone else in the crowd all died of heart attacks because they were frightened by the gunshot, this also would not be murder by depraved indifference. Even though the indifference caused the defendant to fire the gun, firing the gun wasn't the direct cause of the deaths of the people who had heart attacks. The situation with Trump is similar. He did act with reckless indifference to life. Some people died, but their deaths were caused indirectly by the lack of response to the virus, not directly by the lies and misinformation that Trump spread. If Trump told a lie and someone dropped dead just from hearing the lie, you would have a better case. Third-degree murder, or depraved indifference, differs from manslaughter in that with manslaughter there is neither intent to cause death nor even a high likelihood of death resulting from the defendant's acts. A common example would be a fist fight in which someone is killed. A person can die from a fist fight, but it is not so likely that hitting someone with a fist would be considered depraved indifference to life.
Right.
Let's see. The second element is the intent element, which would, quote, get tricky if we didn't have Trump's incriminating admissions, he continued. But, quote, in my opinion, as a career prosecutor, Trump admitted to conscious disregard of the risk his coronavirus downplay created, thus admitting to second-degree murder. So we have...
Note how Kirshner qualifies his statement on intent that this is his opinion. Trump didn't admit that he intended to harm anyone. He didn't even admit that he intended to hide the truth. All he admitted is that he knew the virus was more deadly than what he was saying, and that he didn't say what he knew because he didn't want to create a panic. I don't believe that this really was his motive. I do believe that he lied and that he deliberately lied, but I don't think that what he said is an admission of intent. This is a matter of opinion, though. To sell this to a jury in a criminal case, you would have to show it beyond a reasonable doubt. The mere opinion of one prosecutor, especially when it's not supported by his colleagues, is really unlikely to cut it.
And still went out and downplayed it, told his followers not to take it seriously, that it was a Democratic hoax. I think he is liable for a lot of deaths.
Mm-hmm. Naka brings a completely new element into the picture here, liability. Liability usually refers to civil law, not criminal law, but people do sometimes use the words interchangeably. If Naka means that he thinks Trump is liable for civil damages to people who have died from the virus, nope. Trump has sovereign immunity for acting within the scope of his presidency for damage he may cause as a result of his decisions as president. There are some exceptions to sovereign immunity, but none apply here.
I just want to respond to Godless Granny. In terms of second-degree murder, it is not just an unplanned intentional killing, but there is the death can be caused by a reckless disregard for human life. So that's the argument that the person in this article is making, that there is a death caused by a reckless disregard for human life.
Andy is right, that is what the article is claiming. And I was only partially right in the comment in the chat because the definition of second-degree murder varies from state to state. If Trump were charged with murder, it would have to be under the federal homicide statutes, as he was in Washington, D.C., which isn't part of any state. The federal statutes have no reckless disregard for human life listed in them as a form of murder. I was unable to find any cases where a person was charged with murder for reckless disregard under federal statutes. It might be there. I don't have access to a law library, but if it's there, I couldn't find it.
But if you know that going in, doing this will get you killed, and he tells people to do this en masse to his followers, that is intent. He knows. You really can't separate the two. I'm sure I appreciate the word of the law, the letter of the law, the spirit of the law, that kind of thing. And I certainly, good morning, Godless Granny. Thank you for joining us. But there is intent. Yeah. There is intent.
You have a couple of errors here, Chris. First, no one knew going into this that doing this would get you killed, as you say. There is no certainty of getting the virus. It makes it more likely that you will get the virus if you go out without a mask, and it is more likely that you will die if you get the virus. But you don't know that this will get you killed. You only know that there is a greater likelihood. Second, the whole purpose of the depraved indifference laws is to get to murder where intent cannot be shown. It's a way to get around intent. So evidence of reckless disregard isn't evidence of intent, as you claim. It's evidence of reckless disregard.
You know, it's one thing to do war crimes against a foreign country. It's another thing to do war crimes against your own nation in the name of a foreign power. And that's what's happening here. He's doing. He's literally killing Americans as a hand of Russia.
Oh yeah.
I skipped a bit where Naka brings up war crimes in talking about pardons, but there was no evidence presented in the part that I skipped over. So Chris has just accused Trump of war crimes. We are not at war. You can't be guilty of war crimes when you are not at war. Chris should have said crimes against humanity, as that is likely what he meant, but definitely not war crimes. Chris's claim that Trump is doing what he is doing at Russia's direction requires a citation. This was part of the Mueller probe. If Mueller couldn't find enough evidence to bring these kinds of charges, then you shouldn't be leveling them either unless you at least have some evidence to back you up.
Fox is complicit the entire way. The GOP is complicit. I've been saying this the whole time. The GOP needs to be removed and investigated and jailed. They are
Again, citation needed. Leveling these kinds of exaggerated claims against the GOP isn't helpful. It's as much disinformation as a lot of the things that they are saying. Yes, the GOP isn't doing anything to discourage people from coming to rallies and not wearing masks. But that doesn't make the GOP guilty of a crime. Disinformation is not rebutted by spreading more disinformation.
Russia, the whole thing. I would almost be surprised if the liberals, the DNC, isn't also on the payroll of Russia or the conservatives, because they're really just they're supposed to play like they're trying, but they're not really trying. You know.
Now the liberals are also on Russia's payroll because they aren't really trying, and they're in bed with the conservatives. Chris. If you want people to take you seriously, you need more than "this wouldn't surprise you" to level such accusations. I get that you feel that your ideas aren't being heard, but unfounded accusations don't help your cause. This is only the first 6 minutes of an hour-long show, but you get the idea. Much of the rest is just the same. Andy presents some research and has a few valid points. If we want to stand up for truth, we need to know what we're talking about first. And if we want to just spout opinions, there is a time and a place for that too. But if you want to be believed, you need to have some facts to back up your opinions. When the facts don't exist, or exist but can't be found, it's really hard to convince someone that you're right. It's why Christians have so much trouble trying to convince atheists that they are right, because they have beliefs that they can't back up with any evidence that what they say is true. Chris, are you trying to get people to accept on faith that your political views are right? If not, find some facts to back up your opinions. Until next time, live your life.